question, I feel like, you know, on the pro side, I'm acutely aware that we are held, I think, to a higher standard. I mean, people say, you know, oh, Toronto Star, we don't like your Rob4 coverage, we're gonna cancel our subscription. It doesn't really happen in a way that hurts them tremendously. Like, there isn't that direct relationship in mainstream media between people being upset with the coverage and it impacting the bottom line. It impacts our bottom line, and it also we make money. Like when we do stories that people are very happy, when we turn our attention, you know, and sometimes it's in like really micro ways. Like we'll do a story about something happening in Winnipeg, and I'll see that there were like 3 new crowdfunders from Winnipeg. Like, thank you for giving a damn, you know, and they'll start funding it. On the downside of that is the question, I guess, like, well, are you editing yourself to the sensibilities and politics of your funders? Which I won't claim that that's not a fact or a possibility because I'm such a great and virtuous journalist. For me, it's that I couldn't anticipate and pander to my audience or my backers if I tried, because they aren't a cohesive political, you know, it's not like The Rebel, Ezra Levant's site, where like, this is right-wing news. It's there to give a voice to people who feel like the lamestream media has left them out in the cold, and like, there's dependable politics and there's dependable targets, and as long as he hammers on them, they will give him money. At least that's the business model. I have no real, like anything I say, there's somebody who pulls their funding or gets mad at me, you know? So I think that's probably good. I think it works out well.
Cool. So we have around 10-ish minutes left. We'll open up to the crowd. So just raise your hand and if you have any questions. Sam.
So we've talked about a little bit how the media industry in Canada is fairly exclusive, incestuous, whatever you want to call it, old school, old boys club. So what kind of advice would you give for those who are thinking of taking a more entrepreneurial route into the industry as you have taken yourself?
Does anybody here plan on going into journalism? Yeah. It's a smattering of so I you know, I'll give like the most practical advice I can. Okay, so don't do it. It's very stupid. There are no jobs at all. If that doesn't dissuade you, here's what you should do. And I'm going to tell you to do what I did, only because it worked for me and I haven't seen other people do it and fail. So I'm just curious to see, like, just for my own amusement, and because I think it's like, it's the holy grail right now. It's a viable model for doing journalism, and I don't know why there aren't a couple dozen people trying it. And this is what you do. Don't ask permission, don't go on a job interview. If you want to do journalism, if there's a topic, a beat, that you are fascinated by and that you feel is going underreported, like if you feel like there's a vacancy in the market, like no one's paying attention to this crucial area, no one's doing podcasts about this or news reports about that, just start doing it. Start investigating, start reporting, start whatever you, I don't know what platform, doesn't really matter, and give it away for free for a year, and you'll know by month 3 whether anybody gives a damn, and whether there's a good chance that if you think it's really important that somebody cover it, that there will be other people who think that. And then once you get a critical mass, for me it was 10,000 people, which is not that big a number of regular audience members, you say, give me some money, you know, for the price of a cup of coffee a month, I can keep doing this, whatever. So as soon as I had 800 people, it's not a lot of people, 800 people giving me on average $5 a month, wasn't a lot of money to them, then it was my full-time job. So I had like, and that's sort of been the ratio. Like I get 1 in 10 actually supports what I do financially. I don't know why there aren't more people doing that. And I think that it's sort of a no-lose strategy for getting into media, because if at the end of that year, like you'll either find out that nobody cares about your beat, which is good to know, and it'll only cost you a few months, or you'll have this audience that loves what you do, but for whatever reason they're not willing to pay you for it, in which case you can approach existing media and say, hey, I have an audience of 10,000 people. Would you like me to do some freelance work for you? And you're in a much stronger position if you come with an audience. So I see a lot of people banging their heads against a wall going on internship interview, job interview. Like there's nothing out there. People who have been working for 20 years are scared for their own jobs. In the freak occurrence that you get a job, you're going to be the first one laid off. Every newsroom in the country's like it's really dumb to go try to get a job in the media. But the flaming collapse of the Canadian news media is not your problem. It's the problem with people my age, it's the problem of the Canadian news media, it's your opportunity. There's never been more areas that are deserving and demanding coverage. And it might not be sexy stuff, like, if you find like areas where like local newspapers have gone out of business, like, they need people doing local, like, covering their elected officials. Like, and if you could do very well, like, that's a business model I'm surprised that people aren't exploiting in markets where local news has just completely vanished. That's something that has mass appeal. Like, hey, did you know no one is covering City Hall in your town? Like, can you give me $5 a month so that somebody's keeping it? Even if you don't read my stuff, it'll keep them honest if there's somebody in there. And that's something that a guy named Joe Coleman's trying in Hamilton. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities for entrepreneurial stuff, and it's happening all around the world, that as legacy media collapses, all kinds of new experiments are being undertaken. Some of them are non-profits, there's things like ProPublica, and we're just like, it's just not happening in Canada. We have all the death and devastation and very little innovation and entrepreneurship. So I think that everybody here who has an inkling to do this should pursue it from an entrepreneurial angle.
So, being from Alberta, my favorite pastime is to go on Rebel and just see what they're talking about. And you covered this today, in your episode today, about the reporter who was doused in a mysterious liquid that may or may not have been urine.
Yes.
But just talking, and this sort of veers into what you were just saying about creating beats that people are going to be interested in. But in terms of the Rebel, so much of its biggest stories have been sort of aggravation-based stories that actually the Rebel is part of. So the reporter being banned from the Alberta legislature, or the one that just came out. So do you think that sort of aggravation-based news is actually a positive contribution, with or without its political bias? Like, it's a crazy right-wing newspaper, on one side, but with or without political bias, is that sort of aggravation-based news where the people covering it are a central part of the article or the argument or the news story? Is that a positive contribution to the Canadian media arena?
I'm gonna say yes, and I think that, story by story, campaign by campaign, I think that the Rebel is, I don't trust, I know, even in that one story of this Rebel, she calls herself a reporter. I don't get very finicky about who's a journalist and who isn't, but she wasn't there reporting. This Lauren Southern with Other was at a protest, agitating, baiting, mocking people, trying to make something happen. And immediately after this altercation, where she may or may not have been doused in piss, she's like, it was just interesting to see her. She was being interviewed by some other news crew that's there, and she said, these people came here to break the law, that's why they were all wearing masks. Well, that's why they were wearing masks. And it's, rewind 30 seconds, and there's 3 of them who have balaclavas on out of a crowd of 10 or 12. So that's the relationship to the truth that she has. And I don't think that they're doing reporting. I don't think you can call it news, but I don't care. I don't think anyone's necessarily under that impression. I don't think they're fooling anyone. Do I think that it's positive to have hyper-partisan journalism? And I don't think it's good journalism, but I will call them journalists. They are out there, engaging with the real world and public policy and public debates. Yeah, I think it is. I think we need extreme voices, moderate voices, informed voices, and there is some value to the kind of trolling, this career trolling that Ezra Levant does. And he has actually revealed things about, I think, overreach from the state and the Human Rights Commission, and overreach from the Notley government. By being such an asshole, he pushes people to extremes where their own prejudices are revealed. And when what is revealed is, on the part of the Premier of Alberta, that matters, that she saw fit to ban Rebel reporters on the basis, I say you're not a journalist. That matters. The Rebel, I don't care what they do or don't do, and I don't think they're particularly ethical, but that was revealed. Something true was revealed by the political theater and political combat that they do. So I think that this democracy can withstand Ezra Levant, and I think it's okay. I think it's okay to have more stuff like that out there.
Other questions?
Do you have any updates on the arts and entertainment show?
Yeah. No. Yeah. We're going to announce the host and the name of it very, very soon, and it's coming very soon. Yeah. We're hard at work in it. We're really excited. You know, it's this challenge. If you want to look at this country as a place where everyone I know is really voracious about art and culture, and we are legitimately, without any kind of, you know, CanCon quotas, we care about the art and culture and music and film that is being made around us, but some disconnect exists around the media coverage of it, where it doesn't sound anything like when you have a conversation with somebody who is passionate about whatever, you know, people specialize, whatever scene or form they're practicing or a fan of. And trying to get that kind of passion and love for the stuff we make in this country onto a show is a really interesting problem to try to solve and approach as radio makers, podcast makers. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun with it, and it's going to come out soon.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Do you think we'll see any revival of the CBC under the Trudeau administration?
I don't know. A little. It gets really weird right now, because they're supposed to get like $150 or $160 million from Trudeau. The last I heard, I should check in and see if there's been any movement on this, the money hadn't come yet. It was conditional on some sort of memorandum where the CBC talks about what they're going to do with it. And the internal chatter was that it wasn't going to go to news, and news has been raised. And it wasn't going to go to radio, which is like the one thing people actually care about, the CBC. So, you know, there was talk that it was going to go to music or other, I don't know where it's going to go. And I feel like there's motion within there, and there are people I know who are trying to do interesting, exciting things. They completely blew it with podcasts. They dominated podcasts when podcasts had their first emergence. You would look at the charts and all of them would be like CBC. And now, like, none of the top 20, well, 2 or 3 of the top 20 will be CBC. But even then, if you actually look at the numbers, they're not in the top 20. They let it to everybody else. That was an official decision that they were not interested in podcasts, and they were developing that streaming format with the pre-roll. It's just awful. So now they're back into podcasts, and that lets them take some more chances with the kind of shows they're making. And I hear that in television, because Canadian TV is in terrible shape, the development communities are not getting any green lights for new interesting Canadian shows. The only outfit that is able to greenlight stuff is CBC, and the early chatter is that they're actually trying to do some interesting television. But I haven't seen it yet, so for me, what is lacking is someone with some vision and leadership to stand up and say, we will be unassailable. Our funding will be unassailable under any government. Our relationship with Canadians will be unassailable. It'll be impervious to technological change if we seize the opportunity of the collapse of Canadian news and become the best Canadian news service we can, and go back into regions, and go back into small communities, and go into the north, redouble our efforts, and just be an amazing, competent news service. And I don't know that there's anybody aside from rank and file journalists there who is trying to pursue that agenda. So I'm not terribly hopeful.
We have time for one last question.
I want to go back to the point that you made about the homogeneity that exists among the journalist class. Now, as you said, the flaming downfall of the traditional news in Canada, do you think that it is being challenged by the emergence of new forms of media? And also, is that a good thing? Because journalists are held to a higher standard, and certain people are better equipped and better informed and better gifted to carry out this kind of work.
I think that there's a strange conception amongst many in the legacy media that people like me and the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and Vice are the enemy. And the reason why they're in such dire straits is because of us. It has nothing to do with us. I mean, I'm a problem, I'm a pain in the ass, I suppose, if I write about something, you know, that you've been up to. But on a business model level, these companies I just mentioned, these online news companies, it's not really substantial what we're taking out of their bottom line, or that we aggregate their content. And content aggregation, they've been stealing each other's content, they steal our content. I mean, that's just it's a terrible argument. They feel threatened by the emergence of new media, but the truth is they are in dire straits because the advertising market has collapsed, and that's because of Google and Facebook. And they're in dire straits because linear television is collapsing, because viewing habits are changing. That is it. That's it. That they had, newspapers in particular, had an absolute monopoly on local advertising. They're the only game in town, and they had a steady, between the classifieds and, you know, leaflets every weekend to go to buy your electronics and every goddamn other thing. Like, you had to go through these newspapers or local TV, and local TV also had the added benefit of like guaranteed money via these cable bundles and through CRTC. So there's like, they just enjoyed an incredible, extended, decade after decade, guaranteed profitability. That is now very much in question, and regardless of whether or not there's new journalism online, I don't think the future is going to be very bright for legacy media. I think that they need to get with the program and start working. It's starting to happen. Understand that we have things to teach them. They definitely have things to teach us, and you know, there's what you hear a lot is like, well, these new shops, they hire kids, they don't pay them well, and where, like, are they really going to be the next Spotlight? Are we going to see extensive investigative journalism from these upstarts? Well, given that most of these newspapers and organizations have basically turned their back on investigative reporting themselves, they're in a historically low point to make that case. But there's a ton of reporting knowledge, of deep knowledge of beats that their staffs have. There's no question that there's value to what legacy journalists do. And I think that this prejudice against, who cares, the medium that you're doing this journalism on, there needs to be more partnership and collaboration, and they need to get their act together. And like, I can't think of one of them that has a cogent digital strategy, like that even in a fantasy, like you just can't. So how are you going to exist 10 years from now? And none of them can tell you a story that, like, unless we all start reading the news every day on our tablets, which they hoped we would, and it doesn't seem like we're doing.